It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday edition of the show. Thanks so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. And today we are jam-packed, so no top ag news stories of the day here today, but we're going to talk to Krista Thomas from Canada Grains Council about Canada finally approving gene editing in the country. We got Senft and Lauren Comin from Seeds Canada to talk about seed regulatory modernization and how they feel that farmers really have a lot at stake when it comes to the changes to the seed industry and its regulatory framework. Chris Vervaet from Comin to talk about the GREAT model and the potential impact on canola in Northern Plains as well as Western Canada. And David Westwood, he's a general manager at the SMRID, so the big irrigation district in Southern Alberta, to talk about water rationing and what that means. Although, hey, it did rain this week, so that's definitely a positive. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And don't forget, of course, to call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. I want to remind you, too, if there's a topic that you want us to cover here at RealAg Radio, make sure you send me that email and give us some leads on some of those stories that you're facing out there in the countryside. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to dig in on gene editing. Canada finally getting its act together. It's approved gene editing in feed. We've met all three parts of the review. Now we have gene editing in the country. What does it actually mean for farmers? Right after this.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
It's now time for a product spotlight, joined right now by the CEO of Seeds Canada, Senft. We're going to talk about a very important topic, and that is seed regulatory modernization. What exactly is this process that the industry has been so focused on?
The seed industry and seed development have a number of regulations that the seed industry must adhere to. A lot of these regulations were set into place over 100 years ago.
Why should farmers care?
When I got this job as CEO, farmers that I got to know had a number of messages to me. One was, we need access to new technology. We need reasonable cost to seed. Farmers know that there's a significant cost to bringing a variety to the market, but that had to be kept into check. They wanted competition within the seed industry. So those are three issues that farmers need to be they are concerned about and need to be concerned as this SRM process continues.
Big news last week in Canada as CFIA made their third of three approvals when it comes to gene editing. In this case, this one had to do with feed. This is the final step in this process for gene editing in Canada. Here to talk about, okay, now what? What does this mean? We've been waiting for this, and we've been trying to get follow-up throughout this process at CFIA. It feels like it has taken quite a while, but finally is completed. We are joined by Krista Thomas. She's the VP of Seed Innovation and Trade Policy at the Canada Grains Council. Krista, it's great to have you on the show here again.
Thanks. I'm glad to be back.
Okay, so I guess we're going to get into what is gene editing and that, but first I want to start off, how significant is this news last week?
This is amazing for Canada's ag sector, Shaun. With all of these three policies now clarified, what it does is it allows gene-edited crops to actually be grown in Canada. And that is great for Canadian farmers who are going to have faster access to the best new seed varieties that have traits like drought resistance and pest resistance, and are going to help them deal with the problems that are mounting every day.
So when can they start to like are is this going to be an immediate thing, or now do we need to prime the pump?
Yeah, I think there's still some priming of the pump that has to happen. It takes time for any new variety to come to market. It has to go through variety registration if it's a grain crop, like a lot of the ones we talk about at the Canada Grains Council. You have to do seed scale up before you have enough to actually offer to farmers. So we're still a little ways away yet, but this has cleared the regulatory pathway now and removed a lot of uncertainty for developers. So this is going to help Canada catch up to a lot of other countries who, as you alluded to, are out ahead of us.
Yeah, and I remember at one point somebody telling me that, Canada was out in front. They were early on this, but it's taken us quite some time to get to this point of approval. So, okay, so we're playing catch up. We know this. Okay, so now some people have probably heard of gene editing, and we sort of throw it around, but we don't actually take the time to learn exactly what it is. What is gene editing? And how, I think more importantly, how is it different than, say, a GM crop?
The example I like to use is the idea of a book. So if we think of a plant genome as being like a book, what a plant breeder does is, they try to rearrange the letters and the words in that book a little bit to try to get an improved addition. So in a plant, maybe that's a little bit higher yielding or better disease resistance in a new variety that they're going to launch. As you can imagine, that's a bit hit and miss, and it might take a while before you land on something that's actually an improvement over the original. So gene editing is a new tool that plant breeders can use, and it allows them to say, hey, there's a typo on page 33 on paragraph 2, so I'm going to go in and fix that exactly. It's a tool that allows targeted editing of a plant's own genome. And that's different from a GM crop, where we would be bringing in DNA from a completely different species. So if you introduce a bacterial gene into a corn plant, for instance, that's a GMO. So it's a bit like taking a page out of Anne of Green Gables and putting it into Life of Pi.
Now, is this going to, do we now have to go through the process of getting export partners or export customers? Do we now have to talk to them about acceptability of gene edited crops, or is that not a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So almost every country around the world has been going through the same process that Canada has been over the past 7 years to try to decide how they're going to regulate gene edited crops. Many have completed that process already, but there are some of our key export markets that are still figuring that out. So that's something that we're looking at very closely. And it does mean that as we want to start growing gene edited crops in Canada, the value chains are going to be talking about market acceptance and making sure that the products offered to farmers are going to be accepted by our end customers.
Well, I jump right away to what's China's opinion on gene edited crops, because that's probably the export market that we would, we have faced some, on a trait perspective, we faced delays on trade approvals. So how does China sit on gene edited crops?
Yeah, I think many countries, ask the question, are gene edited crops the same as GMOs or not? And the vast majority of countries around the world have said that these are not GMOs and they need to be regulated more like conventional plants. China's in a little bit of a gray area where they've issued some guidance that still places gene editing under the GMO umbrella, but it does appear that they'll be treating them a little bit differently, and hopefully we'll have a faster process. We need to get a little bit more experience there in that market before we'll really understand that well. But it's worth noting that, big picture, China is opening up on GM crops, and they have invested hugely into gene editing as well. So we are optimistic that we're going to see a regulatory pathway there that will work and that will allow the products we want to grow in Canada to get approved there.
When they do come to market, will the farmer know if they're growing a gene edited crop?
Absolutely. That's really important for, the customers. We know we're going to have customers who will be very happy to take grain that was developed using gene editing, but we'll also have some customers who will want grain that was not. So we need to have a way of communicating that within the value chain to the end user. And that starts when a farmer buys seed, right? So it's really important for farmers to be able to know when they're buying their seed if it was developed using gene editing or not. And I think we're really fortunate in Canada to have had a lot of good discussion and cooperation about this with the seed sector and within the value chain. And we have a number of tools now that will provide that transparency at the varietal level. So a farmer would know by looking at a seed catalog if their seed is gene edited. There are also a number of online resources that they can use to double check if it's something that they're being asked to do.
This is very interesting. We've heard a lot about some of the opportunities of gene edited crops, and one of the examples that is often given to me, and we'll have to see if reality plays out in this fashion, but one of the things that has been said to me is that because the cost of development is so much lower, it's more cost effective than some of the methods we've been using today when it comes to plant breeding, that it could open up the opportunity for new players in the sector because it lowers the hurdle rate. So is that something that Canada Grains Council that you could see being one of the outcomes, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we are absolutely seeing that already. A number of the companies who have shared with us that they're using gene editing and developing new crops, they tend to be newer, smaller seed companies. So we are seeing these new players come in and begin to develop those crops. We're also seeing public sector, university researchers using the technology. So when we think of plant breeding innovation, we often think of those GM crops in corn, canola, soy. But we're seeing a lot of research using gene editing in other crops as well, like wheat, flax, pulses, some of those smaller crops where, you would never be able to have a GM trait in them just because it's so cost prohibitive. And if it's a smaller crop, there's not enough ROI to try to have a GM trait. So gene editing offers an opportunity for innovation in some of those smaller crops where we see a lot of pest issues and, production challenges that could be improved.
So very speculative in nature. And I know you're, as you described to me, super sciencey. So just bear with me. If we've got GM crops and we've got gene edited crops, and like there's a mixture there too, like you can use gene editing in GM crops too, right?
Yeah.
So let's just pretend they're mutually exclusive for a second. And we're trying to solve a problem. Okay. If the route to the outcome is cheaper and faster with gene edited crops, do we potentially displace some of those GM crops out of our system, or is that yet to be kind of determined?
That's a really good question. And everything I'm seeing suggests that we're still going to have GM crops for a long time to come. They are different tools that, each one has their place, and they can be used to solve slightly different issues. Like if you think about BT corn, for instance, where you brought in a completely new insect resistant trait that came in from a bacteria, that would have been pretty hard to just develop in the corn, out of the corn genome in and of itself. So I think there's going to be a place for both of these technologies going forward.
Yeah, cool. Because it's not just about like chasing yield or something like that. That's yield's obviously important, but it's also about being able to have new tools of precision to be able to get the plant to express certain things maybe later on in the growing season, right? That are even hard to get our heads wrapped around at this point. So there's a real opportunity here. What's been, I was going to ask you like, what's been the reaction, but I have seen nothing but big time positive reaction from the sector in terms of what this means for Canadian agriculture. This is like, how long have we actually been waiting for these three pieces of the puzzle? Can you remember?
Well, I came on board with the Canada Grains Council in 2017, and right away we started asking the government to, provide the clarity on these policies that would let a developer know if they need to do a GMO style pre-market safety assessment for all of these varieties or not. So it's been a really long time coming. That's why we're so glad that we've finally gotten there. We saw Health Canada come out 2 years ago with food safety guidance, CFIA with environmental safety a year ago, and now finally the livestock feed piece. So we have all the three that we need, and it's more important now than ever. Like, just thinking about the farmers and the ranchers in Western Canada who have been facing like severe drought for the past few years, right? We've seen strained hay and feed supplies. As a result, our cattle numbers are down. Think about what it means to have crop varieties that can maintain their yield even in water limited conditions. Like this is something that's going to be very important for the resilience of our sector going forward. We all wish it happened sooner, but we're just glad it happened now.
Final question. Does the U.S. have this approval yet?
It does. It does. It has had guidance out for a little while. Most countries in South America do, Australia as well. Even India and some countries in Africa have their guidance out. So it's really good to have Canada joining the party.
Well, we took our time, but we got the answer that the industry was looking for. So, Krista, really appreciate you joining us here today. Much appreciated, like I said, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Shaun.
That is Krista Thomas, VP of Seed Innovation and Trade Policy with Canada Grains Council. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio right after this.
Want a product that will give you nitrogen all season long? Then you want to try Envita. Envita gets directly into the cells of the plants, and it's easy to apply, foliar or in furrow. Envita provides the flexibility you need for your farm practices. Whether you want to reduce your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain your nitrogen and increase yield, Envita fits your farm. Envita SC formulation is OMRI registered. To learn more about Envita, visit azotic.com. That's AZOTIC.com.
Join us for the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, August 19th to 22nd in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Spend time networking on the trade show floor, hear from keynote speakers, and take in breakout sessions designed to increase profit, manage your rangeland, and navigate trends. Get up close to advanced techniques and hands-on demos, and kicking it all off is Lamley's Bull event. Proud, sustainable, and innovative, we are beef. Registration is now open. Visit CanadianBeefIndustryConference.com for full details and to register.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Fortunate to be joined right now by the CEO of Seeds Canada, Barry Senft. Hey, Barry, how's it going?
Not too bad.
And also joining us is Lauren Comin. She's the Director of Policy at Seeds Canada. Lauren, great to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Okay, we're going to talk about a very important topic here today, something that's been really taking up a lot of the oxygen in the seeds industry in Canada, and that is seed regulatory modernization. Now, this process is often referred to as well as SRM for short. So, Barry, give us the 100,000-foot description here. What exactly is this process of the seed regulatory modernization that the industry has been so focused on?
Well, the seed industry and seed development have a number of regulations that the seed industry must adhere to. A lot of these regulations were set into place over 100 years ago. So it was back in 2018 that CFIA announced that they were going to do the SRM, the Seed Regulatory Modernization process. Now that got delayed 1 or 2 years because of a number of factors, including COVID, seed synergy. So it did start in earnest in and around the mid 2020. And so when CFIA announced this, we were quite happy that CFIA was undertaking the modernization of regs that were in place 100 years. And not that those regs hadn't been, changed over that time, but again, something that basis of 100 years old, when times were so significantly different, they were due to be reviewed. And so since then, there's been 8 task teams set up along with a working group to review different segments of those regulations. So right now, we've just completed, as of May 1st, yesterday, the second consultation process CFIA has had to this point with what has come to discussion in either the task teams or the working group. So we've just completed that. We await for them to assemble that report, which is forecast for this fall, to see what stakeholders had in mind responding to the questions that CFIA posed to the industry.
Okay, so Barry, when it comes to seed regulatory modernization, why should farmers care? What does this have to do with them? What's at stake for farmers?
Well, there's a lot at stake for farmers because, seed is important. That's, we're amidst the season that seed is going down into the ground, and, a very, very important aspect to it. Shaun, when I got this job as CEO almost 3 years ago, my neighbors around the farm and farmers that I got to know across the country had a number of messages to me when I started this role. One was, we need access to new technology. We need reasonable cost to seed. Farmers know that there's a significant cost to bringing a variety to the market, but that had to be kept into check. They wanted competition within the seed industry. So those were 3 points made. Now, access of technology, new technology for farmers is important because while we're going along our farming in this country, we've got our competitors with also a regulatory environment that the seed industry has to work within. We can't be behind those competitors as far as access to that technology, whether it's drought resistance, whether it's addressing pests, those types of issues. We've got to be at least at the same rate of introduction of that technology, if not in advancement to that. A lot of times in the competitive world, somebody that has something a little quicker than others has a competitive advantage. Seed costs are significant as it is. Farmers are willing to pay for that technology, but they don't want to pay for anything, for any bells and whistles that somebody else has dictated that they should have to pay for. The third issue is competition. And they want seed retailers, seed development to be in a competitive market. And that's with both large seed developers and the smaller ones. And that's important from both of those aspects. From the multinationals, they're looking around in a number of different countries to see where they have hospitable types of a regulatory environment to invest in. And if we got, again, requirements of no relevance, and they look at that and seed development is risky business as it is, and then you've got this regulatory environment that doesn't welcome them to come into Canada to do business, they'll move elsewhere to our competitors. And again, we're going to miss out on that. For the small seed developers, it's important because it's a maze of regulations that they don't have the resource to maneuver through. And that's so important for minor crops. And it's important for the smaller grain growing regions of Canada.
So, Lauren, what from the viewpoint of Seeds Canada, what's going to fix this situation? What needs to happen from your point of view?
Well, right now, Seeds Canada is talking and has been talking for quite a while about the need for balanced, refreshed governance in the seed regulatory system. So the seed sector looks dramatically different than when it did when the Act and the regulations were first penned in the early 1900s. And I think everyone would agree that seed products look dramatically different now too. And I don't think anybody wants to go back to the options that we had back when the Act was originally written and the intent of the Act was developed. At our 2022 AGM in Winnipeg, Seeds Canada introduced a concept for an inclusive independent industry advisory body for seed regulatory governance. So not only would this system and this body correct the imbalance in decision-making and standard setting in our certification system today, but it would also provide a mechanism for continuous improvement to avoid having to rely on these periodic large-scale amendment periods. The SRM process, as Barry has already talked about, it is taking so much time and resources, not only out of the seed sector, but out of farm groups and out of the CFIA. And resources are being diverted to this process where we do not have a guaranteed return on our time investment. As we approach the end of the SRM window, which is 2025, the seed sector is increasingly concerned that we are not going to get out of this process the level of modernization that we need to see, not only to bring the seed sector to where the global seed industry is in 2024, but to allow us to future-proof, to have the flexibility that the sector needs to respond moving forward. Innovation in the seed sector is happening at a rapid pace. Innovation in agriculture is happening at a rapid pace. I often think about where we were when I first entered the industry and where we are today, and it hasn't been that long for me, and the rate of innovation is only increasing. If we cannot enable our regulatory system to keep pace with the rate of innovation, Canada is going to get left behind. And when the Canadian seed sector gets left behind, that means that farmers get left behind. So to allow us to keep pace with innovation, our framework needs to allow for continuous improvement. Incorporating schedules and standards by reference will allow for simplified updates. Incorporation by reference means that you physically take those pieces of the regulations outside of the regulations and structure their amendment process so that it's much more streamlined compared to a legislative document. An independent advisory committee will not only provide a framework for consultation with impacted and regulated parties on an ongoing basis for any of those pieces that are incorporated by reference, but it also provides a balanced governance structure that reflects the modern seed sector today. So there's a number of things that we really should be focusing on, and the sector is concerned that rather than focusing on these bigger picture pieces that are going to get us to where we need to be, we're focusing on minor edits to what we already have, and in some cases, proposals to even go back in time. So the sector really needs to see that change. We really want to see a return on investment for everyone's time and resources going into SRM. We want to be able to compete moving forward.
That was part of my discussion with Barry Senft and Lauren Comin from Seeds Canada. We've got a lot more in that interview talking about SRM. It's going to be posted at RealAgriculture.com. So, yeah, definitely check out the website to hear that full discussion with the two of them from Seeds Canada. When we come back on RealAg Radio, we've got more to talk about. Next, we're going to talk about what's happened with the GREET model and the potential impact on Western Canadian canola and in the Northern Plains. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Dad, we missed the window for a PGR in our cereals.
Why didn't you add it to the herbicide?
What?
With Manipulator PGR, we can apply as early as one tiller. Just add it to the herbicide, no separate pass.
Don't miss out. Manipulator PGR is proven in wheat, durum, barley, and oats to shorten plants and even out the main stem and tillers. This results in reduced lodging risk, improved harvest efficiency, and increased yield. Talk to your crop protection retailer for more info and to confirm acceptable tank mixes.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Want to use a PGR in your cereals but no time for a separate pass? Manipulator PGR can be applied as early as one tiller. Just add it to your herbicide to reduce lodging risk, increase harvest efficiency, and maximize yields. Talk to your local retailer for more information and to confirm acceptable tank mixes.
Pleased to be joined now on the phone to discuss the big announcement in the U.S. last week, the whole GREET model and what it means for the future of biofuels, including canola crush and processing capacity here in Canada. We're pleased to welcome Chris Vervaet of the Canadian Oilseed Processors Association. And Chris, we've had a few days now to digest the GREET model announcement. What does this mean for our canola industry north of the border?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Calvin. Maybe before I tuck in, you're right, we've had a little bit of time to look at the details and digest it all, but there's still a lot more to comb through. There is an immense amount of information for folks to digest as it relates to what was announced last week. Yeah, but I'm happy to offer a high-level perspective of where we think canola landed in all of this. And I thought maybe I could start with some of the good news, and I think there is some good news that came out of last week's announcement. I think first it's important to recognize that for this particular tax credit, that canola-based sustainable aviation fuel, it does qualify. There's a base amount of $1.25 a gallon for this tax credit, and canola does qualify for that level. So that is good news. More good news in terms of what was announced last week is that there's a pathway for Canadian canola through this new updated GREET model, the new model that will be used going forward to calculate the carbon intensity of different feedstock that are used for the production of fuel. So we see that as a step in the right direction as well. First of its kind in the United States, sticking with the good news side of the equation, is that climate-smart agriculture practices will be recognized as part of this particular tax credit. That's unprecedented for the purpose of calculating carbon intensity scores and rewarding carbon intensity in the United States. There's not been a previous model that we're aware of that did reward climate-smart agriculture practices. So at a high level, it is good to see that recognized and part of what was announced last week. And what I really want to emphasize in terms of what was announced last week is that this sets the stage for the tax credit that is coming down the pike. So the tax credit that was announced last week is specifically for sustainable aviation fuel. It's retroactive to 2023 and 2024. But starting in 2025, there's another tax credit. This is the producer's tax credit, which will run from 25 to 27. And it encompasses all of the major renewable fuels that is of interest to canola: biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel. That tax credit will be solely based on the carbon intensity. And that's why we're so focused on carbon intensity these days, because we do see incentives like this being based on that metric. I'm happy to maybe unpack some of the things that we identified as needing more work, but I can pause here to see if you have any questions, Calvin.
Sure. So this would apply to canola, whether it's grown in the Fargo, North Dakota area or in Weyburn, Saskatchewan area. Is that correct?
Correct. When I reference the fact that there is a pathway, it's a pathway for Canadian and U.S. canola. So when we talk about that base amount that I referenced, that $1.25 a gallon, that applies towards canola grown in Canada or canola grown in the United States.
Okay. So what do you see as the areas where more work is needed from COPA's perspective?
Yeah, from our perspective, we are, so I talked a little bit about this $1.25 base tax credit that we are eligible for. There's an additional component to this tax credit that was announced last week where a SAF producer can earn another 50 cents a gallon on top of that $1.25. It's that additional 50 cents a gallon where it appears that canola-based sustainable aviation fuel is on the outside looking in. We don't think we're eligible for that additional 50 cents because of where we have landed on canola's carbon intensity score using that new GREET model. So there is work that needs to be done leading up to this new tax credit starting in 2025 to improve canola's carbon intensity score and help ensure we are eligible down the line based on a carbon intensity.
So just for context, where would canola rank relative to other potential feedstocks?
So at the moment, based on what we saw last week, canola is above the 50% GHG reduction threshold to qualify for the additional carbon intensity-based incentive. And there are feedstocks, soy, for example, has qualified based on a carbon intensity score calculation. So canola, there's some room for improvement that we think is possible with regards to lowering our carbon intensity, with the aim, again, of meeting that 50% GHG reduction threshold to the greatest extent possible.
So to what extent would this model account for farm practices, again, climate-smart farm practices, maybe that are already in effect, Chris? Are those fully accounted for in this? Is this an aggregate model, or does this have to do with or involve some level of traceability and verification of farm practices?
Yeah, very good question. So when we looked at the climate-smart agriculture practices that were outlined in last week's publication and release of the tax credit details, it's pretty clear to us that for the moment, these practices and the credit that's associated with these practices applies only to soybeans and corn grown in the United States. So that's what this tax credit that was announced last week, that's how it will apply, only to those two feedstock and only grown in the United States. What we've also seen from what was released last week is that in order to qualify for these climate-smart agriculture practices, farmers are going to have to demonstrate a combination of practices. It's not one or two practices. They need to be bundled together. The way that I view this is that it looks to be kind of an all-or-nothing approach. So soybeans, again, right now it applies only to soybeans grown in the United States. A soy farmer, to qualify for this CSA, the Climate Smart Agriculture credit, they would need to demonstrate both that there's no-till practiced on their farm and that they're cover cropping. So because it's that combination approach, this could significantly limit the opportunities for many farmers to participate. Not all farmers are doing both. So this is one area that will likely need additional input from the agriculture stakeholders with the hopes of making this a little bit more practical. It's worth noting that when we look at these climate smart agriculture practices and the details that were released last week, canola is not mentioned as a feedstock yet in terms of qualifying for these credits. This is something that we're looking to change as well leading up to 2025.
So it would be a change requiring canola as well as for Canadian producers, it would be that removing that U.S. grown requirement as well?
We would just want it to add ourselves in terms of having canola eligible. Right now, it's very prescriptive to only applying towards soy and canola, or sorry, soy and corn. Yeah.
Okay. Overall then, Chris, in terms of the trajectory of canola crush capacity expansion in Western Canada and as well oilseed crush capacity in the northern plains of the U.S. as well, what do you see this announcement last week? Does this keep things on track, or does this result in some of those investments being questioned or pulled back?
I think the best way to respond or to answer that question is that it sets the stage for us to undertake some more work. Like I said, there's some really interesting things that were announced last week that I think set the stage for potential. But to actually capture that potential, there's going to just need to be more work and really focusing in on how can we improve canola's carbon intensity score going forward. So that's the detail that still requires a little bit more review. But this is something that the industry here in Canada and the United States, from a canola perspective, will be working on in the months ahead.
Is that improvement to the carbon intensity score, is that something that involves changing current farm practices or recognizing current farm practices?
For canola, we would like to have recognition so that there is a level of participation amongst canola farmers for the climate smart agriculture credits that are going to be rolling out. So that is a very important element in all of this.
All right. Thanks for your insight and breaking it down, and we'll definitely stay tuned as we continue to see new developments, including that the new producer tax credit on the horizon here, Chris.
That sounds good, Kelvin. Thank you.
That was Chris Vervaet of COPA. So some work for canola to do there. Definitely. You know, whether you're talking corn, soybeans, or canola, a lot of criticisms regarding this, you know, having to no-till and be involved in cover cropping. Why both? All or none? Also, one of the pieces of the discussion from Friday's AgriTalk last week that I participated in every Friday was the discussion around, wait a minute, the burdensome amount of record keeping also involved here. So it'd be interesting to see how this evolves and what changes are made. But U.S. Canola Association has to be quite disappointed with canola coming out with that lower carbon intensity score, something I'm sure that they're going to be challenging, working on, and trying to get the crop of canola more involved here going forward. Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to talk about what's going on with some of the water restrictions in Southern Alberta. We're going to talk to David Westwood. He is General Manager for the SMRID Irrigation District. Find out what's happening there. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
These days, the Canadian federal government and multinational food companies are investing hundreds of millions to support BMPs on Canadian farms. But here's the thing, nobody knows your operation better than you do. These programs need your feedback on what you want and what you need. The conversation is happening on Facebook Messenger. Do you have 5 to 10 minutes to chat today? Visit getyourvoiceheard.ca. Your feedback matters.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
We're going to talk about the water situation in Southern Alberta. I know a lot of you have been asking me about it. I thought, well, let's get some facts. We're joined right now by David Westwood. He's General Manager with the SMRID. David, great to have you on the show.
Great to be with you this morning, Shaun.
Okay, let's start off. Before we get into kind of what's happening, give us some context here for a lot of our audience outside of Southern Alberta. SMRID, I believe, is the biggest irrigation district in the region. But give us some more details on what we're talking about here.
Sure thing, Shaun. Actually, the SMRID is the largest irrigation district, not only in Alberta and not only in Canada, but actually in North America now, based on the metric that we use it to judge it by of actual acres being irrigated. So the SMRID irrigates annually right around just over 500,000 acres of land situated just a little bit south of Lethbridge, Alberta, and we pretty much follow the Highway 3 corridor south of the Old Man River all the way to Medicine Hat, Alberta.
Going back probably a month ago now, the SMRID put out its water allocation for the year, a significant reduction in the more traditional allocation of water. Talk about what led to that decision and how you ended up at about 8 inches.
Okay. Yeah, that's for sure. That's what we've set our allocation at for the 2024 irrigation season, at least to start the season. We'll obviously see if that changes in a positive way, if we get some meaningful precipitation at some point during this upcoming irrigation season. It really was led by a couple of things. We started discussions with the province early in the new year, and it was basically everybody from the Red Deer River Basin south. The province recognized that we were heading into or had been experiencing drought conditions going back to the last year or two. In Southern Alberta, it gets most of its precipitation, albeit low compared to other parts of the country. We are semi-arid, but the majority of it arrives in June, and we really didn't get any. We just didn't get any precipitation in June of 2023. All those factors led to low reservoir storage in all of the reservoirs in Southern Alberta, not just within my district, the SMRID, but within other irrigation districts and in the headworks districts owned and operated by the province. And then we did not get any significant snowpack, particularly in the southern part. And that's where the majority of our watershed comes from, is melting snow in the Rocky Mountains, which ultimately we signed some water sharing memorandums of understanding, as they're officially called, amongst users in 4 subbasins in Southern Alberta of how we're going to share water this upcoming season, because we definitely have a lower supply than I would call an average year.
Are there any infrastructure deficits that have been, I guess, acknowledged, or I guess in hindsight, if we had done this from a storage situation or other infrastructure pieces that would have helped us through this, this extended dry period, or is that not an issue?
It's hard, hindsight's always 20/20, but
yeah,
definitely not the operation of the existing infrastructure. What has come out of this focus on this latest drought cycle, which is probably, Shaun, I would say from a Southern Alberta, at least within our region and our district, this is the most acute drought cycle we've seen since the drought of 2001. So that's over 20 years ago. But we have looked at a lot of historical information, and these kind of drought cycles are not uncommon in Southern Alberta. When you go back the last, even within the last 100 years, but we've looked at data going back over 900 years, and you see cycles which we see periods of drought and then periods what we would call wetter cycles, at least by Southern Alberta standards.
Yeah.
I think this one's gaining a lot of media attention for some reason, compared to, it could just be where the state of media is today. But we're actually in a little better shape than we are storage-wise compared to the drought of 2001, but comparable amounts of storage, comparable amounts of demand, I guess. That's probably one factor, probably more population in Alberta compared to 20 years ago, so that's leading to a little bit more demand pressure. But I think obviously one of the outcomes that we're really seeing and that the province is paying attention to now is that because virtually all of our irrigation system relies on the supply out of the Rocky Mountains, but then the effective use of conveyance and storage, and the province is starting to realize that more storage is a good thing, not just to combat drought cycles like these, but really it's more an answer even to when we get an overabundance of water and we have flood cycles and wet cycles.
Yeah, so if we think about the kind of crops that are grown in Southern Alberta, in your district and others, they do not exist without irrigation. Like,
absolutely,
irrigation critical here to the intensity of the agriculture that is in the district. So, I think of sugar beets, potatoes, corn, and others. How is this restriction impacting users' ability to grow some of those crops? Are they able to move water from one pivot to another? Potatoes, where they're looking for say 17 to 19 or 20 inches of water, 8's not enough unless Mother Nature really cooperates. So how does this impact the user?
That's exactly it. We as a district, other districts have different ways how they deal with things. I know some are looking to try some different activities this year in this drought cycle, but we as a district have always allowed, allocation transfer. And so what you will see this year is high value, higher water need crops. Once we announced our allocation, and that was really what irrigators were waiting for. They could finalize plans that they'd been making all winter about what they were going to seed and how they were going to attack this season. But what we're expecting to see is, for example, an irrigator who has some higher value, higher water use crop, for example, potatoes, will look at potentially seeding maybe a little less potatoes. I also know that's a good example because there was an abundance of supply from last season. I don't think the processors are calling for as much demand this year. So I think you'll see potentially a little less seeding on the potatoes, and they might seed a little more grain or cereals that they normally would, and then they will move or transfer allocation from those lower use crops and move it to augment the 8 inches that they would want to put on a potato crop, for example.
Yeah. The other thing that different members of the audience have asked me is they're seeing the province in Alberta, federally as well, make expansion of irrigation acres a priority. Does this current situation potentially limit some of that intent for expansion going forward, or what's your position on that?
We get this question a lot. Obviously, when we entered that Alberta Irrigation Modernization Program, a big outcome for the province was expansion of irrigation and expansion of irrigation acres. They saw it as a good economic driver for the province. It's provided great GDP. It's been good payback on investment that the province has put into irrigation infrastructure over the years. So they really wanted to do that as a economic response measure coming out of COVID and things like that. Our mandate and our goal, and it always has been, each irrigation district, by the projects that we are doing under this modernization, but we've been doing for many years under various programs, is the conversion of open conveyance to underground pipeline leads to real water savings. We see it. Yeah. And we are very confident that we will be able to irrigate extra acres by using less or no more water than we currently use or have used historically. Obviously, when you get a drought cycle like this, people are asking us, well, how could you even think about expanding? And our answer is, well, we won't expand immediately right away. We'll see what happens. But over the long term, and again, going back to my earlier comment about going through different cycles, you weather through a drought cycle, but the reality of it is the water use, I think, is being much more efficiently applied. I really give irrigators a lot of credit. They do a lot of capital investment. The amount of changes, and you would know this obviously, compared to irrigation techniques 20, 30 years ago, with the move from, that wasn't that long ago, and that there is a tiny bit of flood out there, but very little in Southern Alberta, but the move to wheel moves, and then obviously high pressure pivots, and then down to low pressure pivots, which now into the latest technology of variable rate low pressure pivots over very specific spots as that pivot is making its circle. If it's a center pivot around the quarter section, it's quite impressive what the technology is doing of really trying to determine where the water needs to be applied, but always with the idea of not over-applying and trying to be as efficient with the water as possible.
Hey, David, this has been great. I appreciate you shedding light on the details of what's happening, and we really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
That was David Westwood, General Manager at the SMRID. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also, of course, call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.